YouTube, it was reported yesterday by the Woj Twitter account that the New York Knicks all-star forward and second best player on their roster, Julius Randle, will undergo a season-ending shoulder surgery and be out for the remainder of the 2024 season, including the playoffs, hence season-ending surgery. The question a lot of people would ask when hearing that news is, does this mean the New York Knicks title hopes are essentially crushed? And I would say absolutely. I think that's pretty obvious. You lose your second best player for the upcoming playoffs, which you had hopes of taking down a team like Boston, a team like Milwaukee, led by your stars Randle, Brunson, and newly acquired star OG Anunoby, to take you to the finals for the first time since, I believe, 1999 for the New York Knicks. But I think we can all agree Randle's season-ending surgery will essentially take the New York Knicks out of the running for the Eastern Conference. So with that question out of the way, what does this mean for New York long term? What does this mean for them in the offseason? I think it's important to be realistic about the New York Knicks, and it is very unfortunate, the Randle injury, but I think a lot of people would confidently say getting out of the first round even in this year's playoffs is going to be tough. Not impossible, but tough. Getting out of the second round, well, that's where it's almost impossible. But I'm not saying you can't enjoy these first couple rounds if you're a New York Knicks fan, because there's a lot to look forward to in New York, right? Especially since the Knicks have had, not a ton of winning seasons over the past decade or so. But I also think, like I said, it's important to think about what is this team's direction moving forward? What can they do in the offseason, and what will happen in the offseason that will determine whether or not, next season or a few seasons from now, they'll be in this same position come playoff time where you have a legit shot to contend for a title, and then hopefully that time around, nobody important goes down with an injury, right? The offseason and the Knicks' future is what I want to talk about in this video. Let's get right into it, folks. So I think the elephant in the room, if you're a Knicks fan right now, is whether or not OG Anunoby, who was acquired at the deadline for RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and a second-round pick, will either opt into his upcoming player option for the summer and stay in New York that way, or sign a massive extension with New York and not take his talent somewhere else. I think that's a really legitimate concern considering how much you gave up for OG Anunoby if you're the Knicks. But I also think the cap situation could be important as well to consider, because I think OG Anunoby is going to get somewhere close to a max contract, at least $30 million a year type salary for, maybe a 4-year deal or a 3-year deal. I think he's that good of a player and should make that money. Question is, will he be doing it in New York? Well, that's the big thing Knicks fans are going to be wondering, because like I said, you did mortgage part of your future to be able to acquire OG Anunoby with the RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley move, which in hindsight I think was still a good move that the Knicks needed to make, because the timeline of those players just weren't quite where the team was, right? Like, they are young players that are still developing, that maybe haven't hit their ceiling yet in the NBA. You don't have time to wait around for that if you're the Knicks when your best two players are in their prime and approaching 30 years old, right? So I totally understand that, and I love OG Anunoby as a player. I think the fit was perfect for him in New York roster wise, but obviously with the Randle injury, it's going to make things complicated, because now you mortgage part of your future for OG Anunoby, this awesome two-way player who has played very well in New York but also has had some injury concerns of his own, and now potentially he could decline his 2025 player option and become an unrestricted free agent. And as we all know, a player of OG Anunoby's caliber is going to be very well sought after, so the market is going to be booming for him, and I think he's going to make a lot of money in this offseason regardless of where he goes, and he should. The question is, will he be with the New York Knicks next season? The point I was getting at a little earlier in the video, with the Knicks mortgaging part of their future with RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley, sending them to Toronto to acquire OG Anunoby in hopes that he will sign a long-term deal in New York. Like I said, on paper, I think the move was very good for New York at the time, and still, I would probably still have made that move. The only thing, we could talk about, RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley are both playing exceptional basketball, maybe the best of their career so far in Toronto already. So the future is bright for those two players. I think Emmanuel Quickley has improved quite a bit. Having a bigger role in Toronto is really showing what he's capable of as a playmaker and scorer, and just, defensive pest on the ball. So I think Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett are going to make fine pieces to that core in Toronto. My point is, if OG Anunoby decides to leave in free agency, which he totally could, I'm not sure I'd expect him to, but he totally could do that. Does that move look really, really bad for the New York Knicks and bode terribly for their future? Because, like I said, if it's just a rental situation with Anunoby and you gave up RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley for a half a year of Anunoby, and you weren't really contending anyway because Randle was hurt, these are things obviously you can't foresee when making a trade like that, but in hindsight, it would be pretty terrible if you gave up your two most talented young players that have a pretty high ceiling for a rental player. So I personally am of the belief that OG Anunoby will stay with the New York Knicks. I just think it's going to cost them more than maybe they'd like to pay him because they have almost no leverage in this situation. OG is going to have a ton of leverage because I do believe he will absolutely decline his player option for $19 million because he's going to get paid a lot. I would expect like a 4-year, $120 million contract because that's the type of caliber player he is. I'm not sure he's a max guy, but I think, somewhere under the max maybe. I saw a report of someone saying, an NBA insider saying that you could see something like a Chris Middleton type contract that the Bucks just gave him, like a 3-year deal for $100 million, something of that, magnitude. And with New York already paying Jalen Brunson, let's see, $24 million, which, seems like a steal at this point, next season, and Julius Randle $30 million. Then they have Bojan Bogdanovic for $19 million. From that trade, Mitchell Robinson, $14 million, Josh Hart, $18 million, Dante DiVincenzo, $11 million, and Miles McBride, about $5 million. That puts their payroll pretty high. I do believe if they have the bird rights to OG Anunoby, that wouldn't really matter, but now that limits your flexibility quite a bit. And like I said, the Knicks have no leverage in the situation because they gave up so much to get Anunoby that they're going to do everything in their power to keep him around. And if that means paying him a lot more than maybe some other teams would, that's the price you have to pay if you're New York, because you put yourself in this situation to begin with by giving up so much to get him, knowing that he could be an unrestricted free agent this summer, and now maybe you have to spend a lot more than you would anyway. So like I said, if they overpay him a little bit, I think that's the totally fair thing to do. I'm not even against that. I'm saying that's what the New York Knicks should do, but I'm also saying it better work out because like I said, RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley are hooping in Toronto right now, and I would expect them to get even better by the time next season rolls around because as I alluded to before, they're both super young players with a lot of potential who have not reached their ceiling. But the question becomes, if you are able to retain Anunoby and give him that big contract and a long-term extension that keeps him around for 4 years or so, like I said before, you're going to have almost no flexibility in free agency with those contracts already on the books. You can make some trades, like a Bogdanovic trade might make sense at that point. He's making $20 million next season. I think you could maybe add some depth for that money instead, but the question would become, is that team even good enough right now with this same roster basically all healthy and at their best, where you have Brunson, Randle, Anunoby, Bogdanovic, Hart, DiVincenzo, Miles McBride, Mitchell Robinson, Isaiah Hartenstein, who has really stepped up in Mitchell Robinson's absence as I'd say a really good backup 5, maybe even a starting caliber 5. Like I think he's going to get paid in the offseason. He's going to be out of there. Precious Achiuwa, who you also acquired in the Anunoby deal, I think will also leave in free agency unless you can get him on a minimum deal or something like that. But the question is that team even good enough to beat a Boston, Milwaukee? You're throwing all this money on the books and like I said, mortgaging your future at that point, which I think that's totally fair for New York to do. They're in a position where they have a premier player in the league in Jalen Brunson and a really good supporting cast around him, but that really puts them in a win now type of mode, and I'm just not sure it wouldn't be a tough position for New York to be in a win now type of mode for next season in particular, an all-in type of situation, because with how good some of these Eastern Conference teams are, you have to give yourself a shot as a contender, but a low flexibility all-in type of season is very risky, obviously, but it's high risk, high reward type of thing. But if it doesn't work out, let's just talk about what could happen after that. So you have Julius Randle next season and Jalen Brunson, like I said, for 2025-26, which would be the year after next. Brunson and Randle both have player options. Randle's for $32 million, Brunson for $24 million. You have to think Brunson will be declining that and getting a max contract. Basically, he'll be close to 30 at that time and still in his prime. So maybe that's the time you want, if you're New York, to be able to move away from Julius Randle and get yourself a better, more competent number 2. And hopefully if you keep Anunoby, he'll be around that season as well. So that would be some flexibility. But I think going into this offseason, the Anunoby move, like I said, is going to be the top priority for the New York Knicks. And if he leaves in free agency, man, you are in a rough spot if you're New York. I mean, you gave up these 2 premier assets to get him, and then he walks, and even if he goes to an Eastern Conference rival, that's even worse. And then you're in a situation where now you're just back at square one, just without your 2 valuable assets that are also contributing at the moment. So I think they had to take some type of gamble that they took when trading for Anunoby, but it also leaves them in a rough spot. It's a high risk, high reward, like I said, but it keeps them in contention for the moment. Obviously not this year with the Randle injury, but you gave yourself a shot, and I think that's commendable for the front office, because like I said, New York hasn't had this type of situation in so long, maybe since like the first couple years of Carmelo Anthony era in New York. So basically you're in a situation where you gave up a couple assets that are super valuable long term and even contributing to the team now to get an extremely high value 2-way player as your third option, which was a good move. But that player is probably going to be an unrestricted free agent, and if you can't retain him, well, now you lost the assets and the player. Now you're back at square one without the assets, and it's going to be another rough tough season for New York. They'll probably be a playoff team, but in terms of having, real legitimate finals contention hopes, I think that's out the window, obviously, if Anunoby doesn't stick around. Like I said, the Bogdanovic contract is interesting. I think that's another X factor here. I'm not sure the New York Knicks want to pay Bogdanovic $19 million next season. Just for them specifically, I think you could get maybe some more value for that type of money. So a trade is obviously going to be in play, whether Anunoby sticks around or not. I think that's a fair thing to say, that Bogdanovic could be on the move in the offseason with that $19 million contract. But another thing is, maybe get a couple second round picks for him. Bogdanovic is still a really great offensive player, great shooter, can create a little bit of offense off the dribble, just a really good scorer, really efficient offensive player, has his defensive limitations. But I think that was another good trade I felt for New York to make. But it'll be very interesting to see what happens with OG Anunoby in the offseason. Like I said, he is going to have a ton of leverage in that situation, and he's going to get a ton of money either way from whatever team it is. I do want to mention that he has had a lot of nagging injuries since he's been in New York. I know there's an elbow issue, and it's kept him out of a lot of games. So, that could be a little bit more leverage for the New York Knicks if, going to the contract negotiation table where, hey, we want to pay you this big extension and we definitely want to keep you here. Gave up so much to get you, but we're concerned about your elbow and your injury history. So that sways a little bit of momentum, maybe back in New York's favor for a contract negotiation. But either way, he's going to get $30-40 million a season for probably 4 years, like he should. Awesome two-way player, can fit into any team basically. And whether or not he sticks around is going to determine this era of New York, I think, at least for the next couple of years, barring some miracle trade or, draft steal type of situation this season or next season. And like I said, next season, gonna have to extend Brunson and maybe get off the Randle contract and go in another direction there. But for 2025 specifically, you don't want to be wasting these Jalen Brunson years. Like, he is an elite level player in this league who is obviously, poised to make a legitimate playoff push with the right roster around him. But it's a tricky situation keeping those assets, and it's just very unfortunate for the Knicks this year with Randle injury, because I feel for that situation. I've had quite a few of them myself as a Sixers fan, where you have a lot of hope for the playoffs and you really want to make a run for it, and then an injury happens late in the season that squashes your hopes right then and there. Again, something I'm very familiar with. But keep your head up, Knicks fans. I actually think the Knicks would have been a potential favorite to upset a Boston in this year's playoffs. I had like the Knicks, the Heat, the Bucks, and the Cavs, and now the Sixers with Embiid back, all in that same kind of tier of teams that could upset Boston, but everything would have to go perfectly for them, and Boston would have to play some of their worst basketball. It is possible though, and now it's not with the Randle injury, unfortunately, I don't think, but you never know. Jalen Brunson is always surprising people and has been proving people wrong all season and his whole career. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Make sure you guys drop a like on the video. I just wanted to talk about that real quick. Let me know down in the comment section if you are a Knicks fan. Like, what do you think about this situation? I'm genuinely curious because, like I said, I feel for you guys, and hopefully Anunoby is able to stick around. I'd love to have him on the Sixers, but we'll talk about that. Like I said, make sure you guys drop a like on the video. Really helps out the video and the channel, helps new people find the video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you guys do that. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. We're trying to grow every day, and I'm going to be grinding every day. Make sure you guys turn on post notifications if you don't want to miss any future videos like this. We're going to be dropping a lot of videos before the playoffs and during the playoffs. It's going to be a wild playoffs. We're going to talk about that a lot coming up on the channel. I do have a plan to do like a playoffs prediction, full bracket type of video soon, so stay tuned for that. And I'm just going to be trying to upload as close to every day as I can. Hopefully you guys have a fantastic rest of your day today, and hopefully your favorite team wins their next game and retains the rights to OG Anunoby. I will talk to you guys in the next one. This is your boy D-Have, and as always, peace.